Hello students, welcome to Byju's IS. Welcome to a session on economy this week, wherein we'll be taking up some of the very important articles that have appeared in various business related newspapers and we'll be analyzing these particular articles. For this particular video, I've chosen the time period from 21st of September to 27th September 2020 and the articles that I've chosen are from Business Line, Hindu, Business Standard, Indian Express, Live Mint. Let's start the discussion. The first article is related to agriculture laws. Very recently, Government of India has introduced three very important reforms in the agriculture sector. Now, rather than looking at the technical titles or the names of these particular laws, the first law is related to trade and commerce in the agriculture sector, and second law is related to contract farming, and the third law is related to amendment to Essential Commodities Act of 1955. First, related to trade and commerce. Please understand this. As of now, under the concept of APMC, Agriculture Produce Market Committee, which are the laws passed individually by the state governments, the first sales of identified or notified commodities has to happen through APMC Mandi. In the APMC Mandi, the farmer will take his produce. He has to pay certain charges. There is a middleman, Arhatia. He will also impose certain charges in addition to the charges which are already imposed by the state government. These particular produce will be purchased and sold in these particular mandis. And these Arhatiyas are licensed intermediaries or middlemen which are given license by APMC board. Now the issue with the APMC functioning has been that though most of the states have implemented APMC, the farmers' earnings have not been very satisfactory. It has been seen that the middlemen are colluding and they are making huge amount of returns. Farmers are earning very low amount of returns. I want to quote one of the report or one of the surveys that was conducted by Mr. Ashok Gulati. As per his report or the survey, he mentions that the farmers are getting only 25% of the returns or the market prices in the APMC Mandi. In simple terms, once the farmers will sell the commodity in the APMC Mandi, which are again sold in the market, if final price in the market is 100 rupee, then the farmer, when he sells the produce in the APMC Mandi, is getting a return of only 25 rupees. So the farmer, who is the most important stakeholder in this particular transaction, is earning very, very low return. In addition to this, another very important issue with the functioning of APMCs has been that the infrastructure which is supposed to be provided by the state government is not sufficient. So keeping in mind all of these particular issues, Government of India has introduced this particular reform in the trade and commerce of agriculture commodities. As per this particular reform, henceforth the farmer can sell their produce to whoever they want. To whomsoever they want to sell their produce, they can do it. They can sell within the APMC Mandi or they can sell the produce outside the APMC Mandi also. For example, if there is a private market, if there is a private mandi, the farmer can take his produce, go to the private mandi and sell his produce there also. He can sell his produce within the state, outside the state, within the APMC or outside the APMC mandi. This kind of a power of selling or the choice to the farmers will be provided under this particular reform law. Now some of the states are opposed to this particular change. For a simple reason, they are saying that if the central government allows this kind of a change to happen and farmers will start selling outside the APMC mandis, who will regulate these particular private sales? Right now, no such mechanism has been provided. What about the dispute resolution mechanism? Even that particular dispute resolution mechanism which has been provided under this particular amendment or the Act on Trade and Commerce is not very satisfactory. In addition to this, another very important reason why there is opposition to this particular law is that some of the farmers feel that with the choice given to farmers or with the Government of India asking the farmers to sell either in the APMC or outside the APMC mandis, the Government of India may stop giving MSP, minimum support price. Because when they sell in the mandis and government procures, the government will have to pay MSP. Minimum support price has to be given by the government. So these are some of the concerns which have been raised against this particular reform. And second reform is related to contract farming. Under the concept of a contract farming, now the farmer can enter into an agreement with the buyer. I am using the term buyer. In the bill or in the proposal, they have called this particular party as a sponsor. So the farmer or the cultivator can enter into an agreement either pre-harvest or during the sowing season. So basically this agreement has to be entered as to what kind of commodity will be sold by the farmer, or the cultivation of which commodity will be done, what kind of a quality and quantity will be sold, at what prices these will be sold. All these particular conditions will be in a written contract form. This is a basic idea of a contract farming. Now why Government of India has introduced this? Understand this. So far APMC laws did not recognize the idea of a contract farming. Now Government of India wants to put this under the legalization or under the legal method as such. And since contract farming will be promoted under this particular law, the farmer can simply choose to sell or enter into an agreement with a buyer even before the sowing season has begun, thereby ensuring that the farmer will be getting better returns through this particular law as such. Now third law or third important change is related to Essential Commodities Act of 1955. Under this particular ECA, understand the basics first. Government of India will notify certain commodities as essential commodities. I repeat here, under this particular law, the government is empowered or has been given the power to identify and notify certain commodities as essential commodities. Once they are notified as an essential commodity, the government will have the power to regulate the production, the distribution, supply, warehousing, sales of it. Is it okay? I'll repeat it. Once the commodity has been identified as an essential commodity, the government can regulate production, sales, supply, warehousing of these particular products. Even under this particular law, government can fix the prices of these particular commodities. It is empowered to fix the prices of these particular commodities. Now, why this Essential Commodities Act is associated with the agriculture sector? Under ECA itself, many of the agriculture commodities which are identified as essential commodities, the government keeps on regulating how much can be stored, or the warehousing limits on these particular commodities is fixed and changed by Government of India arbitrarily. For example, in the last 1 year itself, Government of India has kept on changing the volume of warehousing that is allowed, or how much storage is allowed of onion based on the powers given to it under Essential Commodities Act. Now this year's economic survey has identified this particular issue and has criticized this particular application of the act. It says that since government keeps on changing the provisions, keeps on changing the limits under the ECA, it becomes very difficult for the agriculture sector to attract private sector investment. Because imagine you want to invest, let's say 100 crore rupees, and you want to develop a huge amount of warehousing, and you have identified certain commodities which you want to warehouse or store in your warehousing. But Government of India arbitrarily keeps on changing the volume that is allowed to warehouse of these particular commodities. Now don't you think that kind of uncertainty will prohibit or hinder the investment in the warehousing infrastructure? So basically Economic Survey identified this and gave the recommendation that some of the commodities should be kept out of the purview of the Essential Commodities Act of 1955. And that is exactly what has been done by the government now. Agriculture commodities, many of these particular agriculture commodities have been taken out of the Essential Commodities Act, and the provisions are not applicable as of now on these particular commodities. But Government of India has stated that in extreme situations where the price volatility is very high, price keeps on rising at a very rapid pace, government would be bringing these particular commodities again under the application of Essential Commodities Act of 1955. So these are the three very important reforms which have been announced very recently by the government, which are applicable to the agriculture sector. And overall, what is the objective of these particular laws? Objective is simply to provide certain benefit to the farmers. Right now, Government of India has an objective of doubling the income of the farmers. Government says one of the ways of doubling the income of the farmers is by providing a choice of selling to the farmers, so that they will have the option of selling to whomsoever they want, so that the price discovery will be much better. Under contract law or under this particular contract forming law, they will have the option of entering into contract. There also they'll get better returns. And since these particular agriculture commodities are taken out of Essential Commodities Act, it will be able to attract huge amount of investment, especially in infrastructure under the agriculture sector. So this is the basic gist of the article which has been provided here. Now based on this, I've given a question here. Consider the following statements. Under the EC Act, Essential Commodities Act, the government is empowered to fix MRP? Yes. In case of any violation, action can be taken under Essential Commodities Act as well as a PBMMSECA. This refers to prevention of a black marketing and maintenance of supplies of Essential Commodities Act. So there are provisions even under this particular act which can be used to punish the violators. So even the second statement is true. Both the statements are true. Option C is the right option here. I've given a descriptive question also. Critically evaluate the recent reforms in the agriculture sector. 250 words, and I'm basically looking at the three very important reforms that I've discussed just now. Next, overhauling of the banking system. One article which appeared in LiveMint basically discusses some of the recommendations which are given by some of the experts in the banking sector. That is the previous RBI Governor, Mr. Raghuram Rajan, and the Deputy RBI Governor, Mr. Viral Acharya. What they recommend are these. One, they basically say that right now the banking sector is overburdened. The banking sector is supposed to act as the promoter of the growth in Indian market. Rather, it is becoming a burden on the Indian economy as such. What is the reason? They say that there is a overburdening of the banking sector by having huge amount of a non-performing asset, and there are various other issues. So what is the recommendation that has been given by these particular experts? First and foremost, they recommend that there should be the concept of a bad bank. They recommend that Government of India should establish bad bank. Now what is the idea of a bad bank? Understand this very carefully. Bad bank as a concept basically refers to one financial institution which will be purchasing the non-performing assets from other banks. Understand the concept here? Here is a bank which will be purchasing non-performing assets from other banks. For example, let's say public sector banks. So if at all a bad bank is established in India, this particular bad bank will be purchasing these particular NPS from the public sector banks. What is the advantage? Public sector banks, or let's say generally any bank, it is an expert in lending activity and recollection. Is it okay? Mobilization and lending activity. But when there are generation of NPAs, certain resource of the banking sector should get diverted or will be diverted to ensure that these particular NPAs will be recovered. And the banks are not experts in that. And in the recent times, we have seen that there is overburdening of these particular NPAs, which is creating certain financial pressure for the banking sector. So what they have recommended is create a bad bank, which will basically be taking away or purchase these particular NPAs which are sitting in the balance sheet of the banks. And the advantage of this particular bad bank will be that these particular banks will have to sell the NPAs or will sell the NPAs to a bad bank. And out of the total money, they will be able to recover some of the amount. And these particular NPAs will be taken care of by this particular bad bank. Now again, this is not a very new concept. It's a very old concept in fact. Many years ago, this was proposed. There have been certain opposition to even the concept of a bad bank, and there have been support. The supporting points basically say that this particular creation of a bad bank will reduce the burden of NPAs in the banking sector. And the banks can efficiently go on doing their activities, that is mobilization of the deposits and lending activities. But on the other side, the critics basically say is, how do you create a bad bank? What will be the structure of a bad bank? How the bad bank will be able to handle these particular NPAs? Who will be investing in this particular bad bank? Now what if one public sector bank has invested heavily in this particular bad bank? Then how do you differentiate when a NPA is sold to this particular bad bank? Don't you think there is a conflict of interest in those kind of transactions? So there are various issues. In addition to all of this, the biggest concern which has been raised is this. When you transfer NPAs from PSBs into a bad bank, the NPA mess will not get eliminated. You're not ensuring that NPAs will not get created. What you're basically ensuring is that the NPAs will get transferred from balance sheet of a bank into balance sheet of a bad bank. That's it. You are doing only that. You are not resolving the mess of NPA. So this has been the supporting as well as the counter argument for the concept of a bad bank. But anyways, these experts are saying we must create a bad bank in India. Second very important recommendation given by these particular experts is abolition of DFS. DFS stands for Department of Financial Services. This DFS basically functions under Finance Ministry, and whatever is the implementation or the decision of Government of India in the banking sector, usually it is implemented by this particular DFS in case of the PSPs. Various experts over a period of time have been telling that the intervention of government or this particular way through which government monitors or regulates these particular banks or interferes in the functions of the bank is not a very good feature. And various previous RBI governors have been against this particular feature itself. So how can you take care of this? Since this is the department which is involved in this kind of a function, abolish this particular department. Third very important function is privatization or reprivatization of the public sector banks. Not a very new recommendation. Various experts have already recommended this. For example, PJ Nayak committee. But PJ Nayak committee basically recommended that set up a bank holding committee and transfer the ownership of these particular PSPs which are there in the hands of the government into the bank holding company. So what these experts are recommending is reprivatization of the public sector banks. Earlier in 1969, 1980s, we have moved towards the nationalization. That is, in 1969, around 14 banks were nationalized. Private ownership to Government of India. 1980, 6 banks were nationalized. Now, post 1991, we have not gone for nationalization. But right now, these experts are saying that rather than going for, let's say, merger, rather than going for any other reforms, which they call them as incremental reforms. Basically, they are saying incremental reforms will not work out in case of India's banking sector. You want the banking sector to support or start promoting the growth of Indian economy. Implement structural reforms, implement long-term reforms and not incremental reforms. And one such reform that they have recommended is reprivatization of these particular public sector banks. And fourth, basically give better package to higher officials or senior officials in the banking sector and retain them, give them more tenure. So higher package or better package and higher tenure will also ensure that these particular officials will be functioning very efficiently and they will help in the turnaround of these particular banks. So these are some of the very important reforms which have been recommended by Mr. Raghuram Rajan as well as Mr. Viral Acharya. Now let's go to the next article, which is related to railway privatization. From the last 1.5 years, there has been a lot of discussion with respect to allowing the private sector companies to run railways in India. And we have already discussed many of these particular articles in the previous lectures also. I just want to give you an update related to what very recently has been done by Government of India. Very recently, Government of India has introduced certain guidelines. Certain very important guidelines have been announced by the government with respect to private sector participation in running of railways. First and foremost, Government of India says the routes on which the bidding will happen and the routes which are won by these particular private sector companies, only these particular private sector companies will be allowed to run trains in these particular routes. Apart from this particular private sector company, if government wants to run trains, yes, definitely that will be allowed. But again, there is a condition. That is, they are saying that from the starting point to the end point, the source point to the destination point, within 1 hour of departure, after 1 hour of departure, no train which is run by the government shall be running through these particular routes. And these particular routes will be allocated to private sector for a duration of 35 years. Third very important guideline here or the announcement here is the private sector entity which is involved in running the trains can purchase a maximum 3 trains from the foreign market. They can import 3 trains from the foreign market. If they want more than 3 trains, then they will have to source it from the domestic market only. they will have to source it from the domestic market only, either from a different supplier in the domestic market, or they themselves can be involved in manufacturing of the trains. They can use those trains only. Next very important guideline is the private sector company which is running these particular trains is allowed to fix its own tariffs. It will be fixing its own tariffs and will keep on revising as per the various market situation. Next, the private sector company will be paying certain amount to the Indian Railways for using the tracks or the infrastructure which is developed by Indian Railways. Next very important guideline, the manpower that is required. For example, the pilots which are running these particular locomotives, the security personnel, all of this will be supplied by Indian Railways only. The private sector company cannot hire their own locomotive pilots. It will be supplied by Indian Railways. They will be working on the roles of Indian Railways. Certain charges will be imposed on the private sector company. So these are some of the very important guidelines which have been issued very recently for the private sector parties which are involved in running these particular private trains. Based on this, I have given a question here. Which of the following statements regarding railways are correct? The operator will be free to set the market linked fares. Yes. In case of the private sector companies, we have already discussed, the company will be deciding what will be the fares. The entity winning the bid will get non-exclusive rights to procure, operate and maintain the trains for a period of 35 years. Definitely yes. Both the statements are true. Right option will be option C. Both are true. The next article is related to DISCOM privatization. First and foremost, let's look at the basics here. The electricity sector consists of three very important activities. First one is generation of electricity. Second one is the transmission of electricity. And the third one is distribution of electricity. Second point, generation and transmission will fall under the central list. So central government will formulate the policy on this. Right now, in case of generation, we have central government, we have state, we also have private sector. And in case of transmission, majorly, it is done by the central government. I am saying majorly. In case of distribution, this is a purview of the state government. In majority of the areas in India, it is the state government which will take care of the distribution of electricity by setting DISCOMs, which are nothing but distribution companies. Having said so, I use the term mainly it is the state government, which also means private sector is involved even in the distribution. In cities such as Agra, Delhi, Mumbai, etc., it is the private sector which is involved in distribution of electricity. And very recently, under Atmanirbhar Bharat, Government of India announced that the DISCOMs in case of the union territories, in case of UTs, will be privatized. Now in addition to this, now Government of India has come out with a guideline, that is a standard bidding document, SBD, which proposes privatization of DISCOMs even in the states. Okay, understand this? Under Atmanirbhar Bharat, Government of India announced that these particular DISCOMs which are under the union territories will be privatized. Now Government of India has come out with a standard bidding document which basically puts guidelines as to go for privatization of DISCOMs even in the states. Under this, the government has proposed different modules wherein private sector investment of 0% is allowed, which simply means no private sector is there, only the state government will operate these particular DISCOMs or owned by the state government. Another model which has been proposed is 26%, in which case 26% of the stake in this particular DISCOM will be held by the private sector, remaining will be held by the state. So this is what has been proposed in this particular article. Now what is the importance of this particular article? Understand this, in case of the DISCOMs, these particular DISCOMs are suffering huge amount of losses. The central government has introduced many reforms, the recent one being Ujjwal Discom Assurance Yojana, where they try to address the financial health of these particular DISCOMs and basically revert the function of the DISCOMs into a profit path. But the recent analysis has shown that these particular DISCOMs performance has not improved. So Government of India is thinking of basically restructuring this particular UDAY and bringing UDAY 2.0. Now whether they are going to do is this or not, it's a matter of a different discussion. But right now what Government of India is proposing is, If the state government want, it can bring in the private sector into this particular DISCOM business, which will improve the efficiency of the functioning of the DISCOMs. That is the gist of the article given here. The next article is related to concept of missing middle. Now, what is this idea of a missing middle? Please understand this. As per the report given here, as per the survey done by McKinsey Global Institute, they have basically defined these companies into big companies, small companies and middle companies, right, or medium companies in simple terms. This particular concept of a middle is based on whether they are able to generate revenue of 500 million or not. Now, first and foremost, what is the importance of these particular companies? Let's imagine you will set up a small company having employees number 20. So after a couple of years, you would want to expand the business, you would want to increase the production. So the size of employees and the investment you want to increase to, let's say, 500 employees, and you want to invest, let's say, 200 crore rupees. Now after many years, you want to expand this particular company much more. You want to hire thousands of people, you want to increase your investment, right? This is a basic evolution of a particular company. That is, you will start as, let's say, a small company, then you will become a medium-sized company, and later you will become a very large company. Now, what is the importance of these particular medium-sized companies? As per this particular institute report or survey, it says that the amount of revenue which is generated by these particular medium-sized companies is very huge. That is, in case of India, there are around 600 of these particular medium-sized companies or middle-sized companies, and they are responsible for 40% of exports. These are responsible for around 48% of revenue generated or contribution to GDP in India. These are responsible for around 20% of employment, either direct employment or indirect employment, right, so on and so forth. This is the importance of these particular middle-sized companies. And this report or the survey says that the number of companies which have migrated from being small to medium-sized companies previously was much bigger, and the migration from being medium-sized companies to large companies previously was much bigger. And since this particular middle or medium-sized companies are very low in number, or the number is decreasing, the number of companies which are getting converted into medium-sized into large companies also is coming lower. For example, between 2008 to 2012, 93 companies got converted from medium-sized or middle-sized companies into large companies. And between 2012 to 2018, this number has come down to 77. What is the reason? The reason that has been cited by this particular McKinsey Research Institute is that, one, the access to cheaper credit is very difficult for these particular companies. They are unable to get access to cheaper credit, and this hinders investment that could be done by these particular companies. And second reason is the cost of compliance. Cost of compliance is very high. For example, dispute resolution, enforcing of contracts, all of them put a huge amount of a financial burden and delay the procedures or the activities which are done by these particular companies. As a result of this, in case of India, the number of companies which are medium-sized or middle companies, the number is very less. And since that number is very less, the conversion from middle-sized companies to large number of companies has also become lower. And this particular institute says that this particular number has to be increased by a huge margin in the coming days. And if you see the performance of the same mid-sized companies in case of countries such as China, the performance of these particular countries in terms of contributing to GDP is around 1.5 times to 1.6 times compared to these size companies or mid-sized companies in India. And this report states that by 2030, the government needs to triple the number of mid-sized companies. In order to do that, what can be done? One, Government of India can ensure that land acquisition should become easier, unlocking the supply of land. Second one, access to cheaper credit, that is also very important. Third, promote more ease of doing business. Fourth, sector specific policies. And fifth, privatization of large PSUs, public sector undertakings. So these are some of the recommendations which have been given by this particular survey. So this is a discussion related to information given in this particular article. Based on this, I have given a descriptive question here. Discuss the issue of a missing middle in India's manufacturing. The next article is related to CAG report on the cesses. First and foremost, let's understand what is the meaning of the term cess. Cess is a type of a levy that is imposed by the government to achieve certain specific objective. I'll repeat the definition here. Cess is a type of a levy that is imposed by the government to achieve certain objective. So, cess such as Swachh Bharat cess, GST compensation cess, Krishi Kalyana cess, healthcare education cess. So, whenever these kind of cesses are imposed, these are imposed and collected to achieve certain objective. That's the first point. Second point, the government will impose, that is central government will impose these cesses, collect the amount and keep it under the consolidated fund of India. But can they use it for any other purpose? Can they use it, let's say, for promotion of education? For example, they have imposed Krishi Kalyana cess, collected the money. Can they use it to promote, let's say, construction of a road infrastructure? Can they use it to promote MSME sector? That is not allowed. So what they are supposed to do is collect it, keep it under the consolidated fund, but transfer it into certain dedicated funds. Transfer them into certain dedicated funds. And these particular dedicated funds, the withdrawal from that will happen only for those specific purpose. That is the whole idea of a cess. Now what CAG report says is, central government has retained around 1.1 lakh crore rupees of cess receipts within the consolidated fund of India. And that is not allowed as per the provision. Because please understand, whenever taxes are supposed to be imposed, cesses are supposed to be imposed, the government will introduce a particular bill or will take the approval of the parliament, introduce it, collect it and put it into a particular specific fund or a dedicated fund, which simply means the imposition of a cess, utilization of a cess is as per the parliamentary approval which is given to the government. But when Government of India introduces these particular cesses, it has taken parliamentary approval, it has introduced it, implemented, collected the cess, put it in the consolidated fund of India and has not transferred to the dedicated fund, which means what? It is basically violating the parliamentary approval. That is the concern which has been raised by the CAG report here. Okay, that is the basic gist of the article given here. They have given specific numbers of different cesses. Do not mug up those particular numbers. They have given how much of the GST compensation cess has not been transferred, how much of the petrol and diesel related cess which was imposed and collected, how much of it has not been transferred. Those numbers are not important for UPSC. Do not try to mug up that particular number. What is important for you to understand is simply 2 points. One, the government imposes cess, collects it, keeps it under consolidated fund of India, then transfers it to dedicated fund. And withdrawals from that should be done only for specific purposes for which the cess has been implemented. And CAG says that Government of India has implemented cess, collected it, kept it in the consolidated fund of India, has not transferred it to dedicated fund. That is a concern which has been raised by the CAG through this particular report. So these are some of the very important articles for this particular time period and the questions related to these particular articles. Thank you. Have a good day.